Despite all four big banks and every economist and their dog predicting a rate cut today, the RBA stayed put at 3.85%. Now, I'm joined by our business guru, Matt McKenzie. Matt, WTF, I was already spending the money that I was supposed to save from this rate cut.
Well, you might get one later in the year, but the RBA's view is there's no need to rush. And history shows once you've fought inflation for years and cost of living pressure, what's the saying? Go the early dog, go the early crow. If you celebrate too quickly and you take your foot off the brake too quickly, things can go wrong very quickly. So the RBA is just being cautious. And to put it in their own words, they reckon they could wait for a little more information to confirm that inflation remains on track to get under control.
I think it's hard for a lot of Australians to understand why they didn't drop the rates further, because all we've heard for the past couple of years is about, targeting this inflationary band of between 2 and 3%, and the annual inflation was 2.4%. And so I think everybody just assumed it was a done deal. Interest rates come down a little bit, and certainly the anecdotal evidence of the economy doing it a little bit tough, and certainly mortgage holders doing it tough at the moment, and cost of living crisis. For the average layperson, it does seem as though there's more than enough evidence to justify a rate cut. Would you say this is just, a reflection of, the RBA under Michelle Bullock, the governor, of taking a sort of a cautious, conservative approach?
Yeah, I think it is a good time for caution, and there's probably 3 points to make. The first one is we've fought very hard as a country. We've borne a lot of pain to get inflation under control. So we've got to make sure it stays there. We've got to make sure it stays under 3%. And that's a reason to just be cautious about how quickly you cut interest rates. The second one is, the good news is unemployment remains very low. 4.1% is historically, it's not a record low, but it's pretty close to record lows. So that's a really good thing. So while the economy is weak, unemployment has been low. And so that means that, that's something that's really important, right? You don't want unemployment to be rising. And because it's low, the Reserve Bank can feel a little bit more cautious. And the other thing is, this signal that they want to wait for a little more information probably suggests to you that they will be cutting later this year. They just don't want to rush it.
And in terms of the data that they're waiting for, the consumer spending data is coming a bit later in this month. Is that one of the big things that they'll be looking at?
Yeah, so that's one of them. The most important, I think, is the quarterly inflation numbers. So you made the comment earlier that core inflation was down to 2.4%. That was in May. That is based on monthly data, which is a little bit volatile and a little bit unreliable, and frankly doesn't actually cover every item. So they'll be waiting until the end of the month to get the more thorough quarterly data to get a fuller picture of what's going on. Sometimes the monthly data says one thing and the quarterly says something else. And you can imagine, I just saw an economist this morning, ANZ, predicting that core inflation would still be, I think, 2.7% for the quarter. If it's higher than expected, everyone would be freaking out if they cut interest rates. So that's why they're taking a little more time.
Yeah. And so I guess, going forward, in your experience, is it unusual to have a situation where, I think like 30 of 34 polled economists in some media analysis were predicting a rate cut, to have most people, the vast majority of experts, be so far off the mark? Is that a bit weird?
David Bassanese, who's from a company called Beta Shares, said yesterday that he found that consensus, the certainty, bewildering. And I agree. I don't think there was any reason why we should have been 90% certain, or 30 out of 34 economists should have been certain that there was a cut. I think sometimes you can have a little bit of herd behavior among economists. And you might remember a few years ago, there was a lot of certainty that rates weren't going to go up anytime soon. And that turned out to be wrong as well. So caution is the name of the game, and Michelle Bullock is perhaps right to be. The commenters can say what they want, but she's obviously the one who's got to wear the punishment if things go wrong. So that's why she's thinking like that.
Well, as we were talking off air, she did her apprenticeship as a deputy at the RBA under Philip Lowe during a period where he was absolutely crucified in the court of public opinion every time those rates went up, after previously saying that he didn't think they would go up. So she obviously takes a very cautious approach by nature. And in terms of that caution, a lot of these same economists who were predicting a rate cut, some of them were saying that by the end of the year, the cash rate might have a 2 in front of it. Would you say the decision today makes that seem a little less likely?
Yeah, I always thought that was unlikely, and I think the decision today suggests that 2 point something by the end of the year. I'm going to go out on a limb myself and say I don't think that's going to happen. Unless Donald Trump blows up the world economy or something crazy happens, I don't think rates are going to have a 2 in front of them by the end of this year, because just remember, we've just spent all this time fighting inflation we don't want to invite it to come back to the dinner party.
Yeah, well, business guru Matt McKenzie, unless you're coming to us next month with a rate cut, don't bother coming to the studio.
Thanks for having me.